In 1997, Jake Tapper sat down for dinner with Monica Lewinsky, an ordinary evening that would later take on extraordinary weight. Afterward, he did something few people noticed at the time, and even fewer expected would matter. Weeks before a political earthquake shook the country, he published an article describing the encounter. The piece leaned on playful tabloid-style language, light jokes, and casual observations. But once the scandal erupted, those words felt different, heavier, more unsettling. He described her as kind and pleasant, even assigned her a grade, then continued on with his career. Yet that single dinner refused to stay in the past. It followed him for decades, raising uneasy questions about timing, foresight, and how much journalists truly understand before the rest of the world catches up. Nearly 3 decades later, Tapper is prepared to explain what really happened, and the truth defies almost every assumption. Jake Tapper was born on March 12, 1969, in New York City on Staten Island. His parents, Theodore Tapper and Helen Palmier, soon set the foundation for a life shaped by service and curiosity. His father, known as Ted, was a Jewish pediatrician who earned his undergraduate degree from Dartmouth in 1956 before graduating from Harvard Medical School in 1960. He went on to open South Philadelphia Pediatrics, a practice devoted largely to children from low-income families. Medicine for Ted Tapper was not simply a profession, it was a moral commitment. Jake's mother, Helen, was born in Canada and spent decades working as a psychiatric nurse at the Philadelphia Veterans Affairs Medical Center. There, she cared for war veterans with patience, humility, and steady compassion. Her work demanded emotional strength and quiet resilience, qualities that subtly shaped the household she helped build. Shortly after Jake's birth, the family relocated to Queen Village in Philadelphia. Their home was filled with books, thoughtful discussion, and an unspoken sense of responsibility to others. Ted also taught at Jefferson Medical College, balancing academic life with long days at the clinic. His devotion to underserved communities left a lasting impression on his son. Jake grew up absorbing 2 powerful influences, his mother's empathy and his father's discipline. Together, they formed a worldview grounded in fairness, purpose, and accountability. Life in Queen Village was modest but intellectually rich. Jake's parents held progressive values, yet they never imposed their beliefs. Instead, they encouraged dialogue. Dinner table conversations regularly drifted toward politics, justice, and ethics, not as lectures but as open exchanges. Jake later described this approach as a kind of hippie parenting, less focused on rigid rules and more invested in honesty and critical thinking. From an early age, he learned to question assumptions rather than accept them at face value. That sense of stability shifted dramatically in 1977, when Jake was 8 years old and his parents divorced. Suddenly, his life was split in 2. Part of his time was spent with his father in Marion, an affluent suburb. The rest was spent with his mother back in Queen Village, a working-class neighborhood with a very different pace and texture. Moving between these environments exposed him to sharply contrasting realities within the same city. It taught him how circumstance shapes perspective and sharpened his ability to listen, truly listen, to people whose lives looked nothing like his own. Both of Jake's parents were Jewish, and faith quietly informed the rhythm of his upbringing. He attended Aqaba Hebrew Academy, a Jewish day school that combined religious instruction with secular education. There, he gravitated towards storytelling. He edited the school newspaper and discovered the power of words to explain, provoke, and connect. By 8th grade, he was already publishing a comic strip in a local weekly, inspired by Gary Trudeau's Doonesbury. Humor, he learned, could expose truths that straight reporting sometimes could not. That instinct occasionally landed him in trouble. During his senior year, a prank cartoon crossed a line and resulted in suspension and community service. But the incident also revealed something deeper, a rebellious streak and a willingness to challenge authority when it felt unjust. When he graduated in 1987, he carried with him a clearer sense of right and wrong and a stronger, more confident voice. Aqaba's pluralistic environment had taught him to respect opposing viewpoints, a principle that would later become central to his approach as a journalist. Outside the classroom, his father's medical practice continued to shape him. Jake spent hours watching Ted care for children whose families had few resources and fewer options. He saw compassion translated into action and dignity restored through simple acts of service. Those afternoons in the clinic quietly planted an idea that would stay with him. Fairness mattered, and silence in the face of inequality was its own kind of failure. Someone, he realized, always had to speak up. Earlier, in 1975, Jake had begun elementary school at the Philadelphia School, an experimental institution still finding its identity. Traditional grades and tests were absent. Homework was minimal. Learning unfolded through hands-on projects and exploration. Each week, students traveled to Sycamore Farm, tending animals and working outdoors, even during bitter winters in unheated barns. Jake thrived in this environment. One project turned the classroom into a mock gold rush, with students claiming land and writing stories about their discoveries. Another reenacted the Civil War, dividing classmates into North and South. A pet tarantula named Oscar lived in the room, a reminder that curiosity often thrives in unconventional spaces. School felt less like obligation and more like adventure, nurturing an imagination that would later fuel his reporting. By the 1980s, Jake returned to Marion for high school at Akiba Hebrew Academy, where journalism became more than an interest, it became a calling. As editor of the school newspaper, he wrote about his community and learned how careful reporting could illuminate truth and build trust. Debate soon followed as a parallel passion. He relished arguments grounded in evidence rather than emotion, developing a habit of scrutinizing every claim. That discipline would later define his professional style. During his senior year, he interned for Ed Rendell's 1987 mayoral campaign in Philadelphia, gaining his first real exposure to politics from the inside. The experience demystified power and sharpened his understanding of how narratives shape public life. That same year, he graduated and set his sights on Dartmouth College, carrying with him the confidence of someone who knew how to question authority without dismissing it outright. At Dartmouth, Jake majored in history while also studying art and visual studies. He was drawn to the intersection of facts and imagery, how stories could be told through both evidence and visual language. He graduated in 1991 with high honors, earning election to Phi Beta Kappa and graduating magna cum laude. Yet the most transformative chapter of his college years came earlier. In 1989, Jake studied abroad in Prague, arriving just as the Velvet Revolution began. He found himself in the middle of a historic uprising, as thousands filled the streets demanding freedom from communist rule. Day by day, he watched a rigid system collapse without bloodshed. Standing among protesters in Wenceslas Square, he witnessed the raw power of truth when shared collectively. Authority shifted almost overnight. For Jake, it was a revelation. Journalism, he came to believe, mattered most when it stood alongside ordinary people, documenting their voices rather than speaking over them. When he returned to Dartmouth, that belief deepened. He immersed himself in activism and wrote for the college newspaper, covering student demonstrations against apartheid in South Africa. The work reinforced a lesson he would carry forward. Telling the truth was not just about reporting events. It was about understanding whose stories were being told and why. He didn't just observe the protests at Dartmouth, he joined them. Jake stood alongside other students demanding that the university sever its financial ties with companies doing business with South Africa's apartheid regime. For him, activism was not abstract. It was participatory, rooted in the belief that institutions should be held accountable for the consequences of their choices. At the same time, he found another outlet for dissent through humor. He created a comic strip called Static Cling, where politics, self-righteousness, and public hypocrisy were skewered with precision. The satire was sharp but purposeful. It wasn't about ridicule for its own sake. It was about questioning authority and exposing contradictions without losing empathy. During these years, Jake also interned at a radio station where he learned the mechanics of live broadcasting. Conducting interviews in real time taught him how to think on his feet, listen closely, and ask follow-up questions that mattered. The experience quietly prepared him for television long before that path became clear. After graduating in 1991, he briefly enrolled in film school at the University of Southern California. But the pull of journalism proved stronger, and he left to pursue reporting full-time. Around the same period, his life took an unexpected turn. Doctors discovered a benign brain tumor. In his early 20s, Jake underwent surgery and made a full recovery, but the experience left a lasting mark. The scare compressed his sense of time. It sharpened his urgency and clarified what mattered. Work, he realized, couldn't be postponed or treated casually. If he was going to tell stories, they needed to count. In 1992, he landed his first political job in Washington, D.C., as a press assistant for Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan of New York. The role was intense and unrelenting. Jake scheduled interviews, managed press logistics, and helped draft talking points, often under severe time pressure. Life on Capitol Hill exposed him to the inner workings of political language, how words could be shaped, softened, or weaponized depending on the moment. He learned how influence operated behind closed doors, knowledge that would later give his reporting an uncommon edge. He also developed deep respect for Moynihan's intellect and mastery of detail, qualities Jake would try to emulate throughout his career. In 1993, he moved into journalism full-time, joining the Washington Post magazine. There, he plunged into investigations of congressional ethics. For one major story, he interviewed more than 50 people connected to allegations of financial misconduct by lawmakers. He stayed late, cross-checking names, dates, and documents, building a reputation for meticulous accuracy and even-handedness. The reporting illuminated how accountability functioned, or failed, inside Congress, and established Jake as someone unafraid of complexity or discomfort. By 1994, he joined Washington City Paper, where he spent 3 years covering corruption inside the city's government. His reporting on aides to Mayor Marion Barry uncovered misuse of public funds, revelations that eventually led to arrests and policy reforms. He filed Freedom of Information Act requests, traced financial trails, and kept pushing when officials refused to cooperate. Doors closed. Phones went unanswered. He didn't back down. The work earned him a reputation as a relentless reporter who prioritized truth over access or convenience. Jake Tapper's ascent accelerated in the late 1990s as Washington simmered with political tension and his notebook was never empty. In 1998, while still at Washington City Paper, he immersed himself in the unfolding Clinton impeachment. He wasn't content to recycle headlines. He dug beneath them. He developed sources among staffers on the House Judiciary Committee, the group handling the perjury case against President Bill Clinton. They spoke quietly about secret negotiations, internal disagreements, and strategic debates over how aggressively to pursue the president. Everything they told him hinged on 11 key grand jury testimonies given in March of that year. As the political pressure mounted, something unexpected intersected with his personal life. On December 23, 1997, just weeks before the scandal erupted, Jake went on a blind date with a young woman who was, at the time, entirely unknown to the public. Her name was Monica Lewinsky. He later wrote about the date with a blend of awkward humor and unease. In an article published on January 30, 1998, he gave the evening what he jokingly called a B-. He described her as sweet and nice and wrapped the story in a deliberately exaggerated tabloid tone, complete with playful headlines like 2-bit romance and Monica let me a quarter. On the surface, the piece read as lighthearted. Beneath it, however, was a pointed critique of Washington's appetite for turning private lives into public spectacle. The article captured the city's obsession with scandal so precisely that it earned him an award from the Society of Professional Journalists. His phone began ringing more often. Soon after, Salon brought him on board. Meanwhile, the impeachment battle intensified. Sources told him that Republicans were invoking memories of razor-thin vote margins as leverage in negotiations, keeping psychological pressure high during perjury deliberations. When the House voted on December 19, 1998, the perjury charge passed 228 to 206. The case then moved to the Senate, where it collapsed on February 12, 1999, failing by a vote of 45 to 55. From his reporting perch near the Judiciary Committee, Jake revealed just how close the president had come to a far more devastating outcome. Aides spoke to him about immunity deals for witnesses like Betty Curry, about 18 recorded phone calls prosecutors relied on, and about how Clinton's legal team narrowly avoided what could have amounted to as many as 20 felony counts. It was gritty, inside reporting, access forged at the intersection of a blind date and a constitutional crisis. The work lifted Jake out of the anonymity of freelance journalism that placed him firmly among reporters who were now taken seriously at the national level. But that intensity came at a cost. By 1999, the constant deadlines, political drama, and long nights began to wear him down. Television offered a new outlet. ABC News brought him in as a producer for Nightline, and his first major assignment focused on a political shock few had anticipated. On November 3, 1998, Jesse Ventura, a former professional wrestler, won the Minnesota gubernatorial race with just 37% of the vote, defeating Norm Coleman and Skip Humphrey. For Jake Tapper, it was a story about power, disruption, and the unpredictable nature of democracy, and he was immediately captivated. The story didn't end on television. The following year, Jake Tapper expanded his reporting into a full-length book. Body Slam, the Jesse Ventura story, published by St. Martin's Press in 1999, examined how an outsider candidate stunned the political establishment. Tapper detailed how Ventura's razor-thin primary margin, just 0.4%, and a total of roughly 793,000 votes, overturned expectations and rattled Washington. The book wasn't just about a wrestler-turned-governor. It was about volatility in American democracy and how conventional wisdom could collapse overnight. While continuing his work at Nightline through 2001, Tapper closely followed Ventura's early months in office. He covered the governor's unconventional proposals, including a push for a $30,000 annual salary and the dismissal of 120 state employees. Behind the scenes, Tapper's fast-paced editing and sharp narrative structure helped energize the program. That year, Nightline's ratings climbed by roughly 10 to 12%, a reflection of reporting that moved quickly without sacrificing depth. After September 11, 2001, Tapper's storytelling shifted to a far more dangerous terrain. As a producer for Nightline, he helped coordinate coverage from Afghanistan as the U.S. invasion began on October 7th. His team gathered more than 200 hours of footage from the field, working under constant threat. They interviewed 23 Taliban defectors, including one who surrendered on November 14th after U.S. airstrikes killed 87 fighters near Kabul. The broadcasts exposed deep fractures within the Taliban, including reports of more than 120 executions of dissenters since 1996. Viewers saw images of the Northern Alliance capturing Mazar-i-Sharif on November 9th, followed by the surrender of roughly 400 Taliban fighters. One defector, Mullah Wakil, told Tapper that Osama bin Laden had escaped toward Tora Bora on December 12th, carrying an estimated $20 million in cash. On December 20th, ABC circulated an internal memo praising Tapper's work for its clarity and composure under extreme pressure, noting that his team delivered one of the most human portrayals of the war's opening phase. That same year, Tapper co-authored another book, Down and Dirty, The Plot to Steal the Presidency, released on October 16, 2001. The book dissected the 2000 Florida recount in painstaking detail. Drawing from more than 1,200 pages of transcripts and records, Tapper explained how 18,000 undervotes in Palm Beach County and errors linked to the butterfly ballot reshaped the election outcome. He traced the decisive 537-vote margin, certified on November 26th, to cascading failures, including the Brooks Brothers riot on November 22nd that halted the Miami-Dade hand count. The book also referenced the National Opinion Research Center audit, which suggested that under certain recount standards, Al Gore could have prevailed by anywhere from 60 to 171 votes. Released in the shadow of 9/11, the book still sold around 50,000 copies in its first year. It confirmed that Tapper was no longer just covering war or campaigns. He had emerged as a national political investigator. In October 2001, he reported through another wave of fear as anthrax-laced letters arrived in Washington. When envelopes postmarked from Trenton were delivered to Senate offices on October 15th, Tapper rushed to the Brentwood Postal Facility. Two workers there, Joseph Cursine Jr. and Thomas Morris Jr., would later die. Tapper interviewed 14 employees who tested positive for exposure and reported live as the CDC confirmed on October 24th that the spores matched the AIM strain. He described a system overwhelmed and unprepared. 1.2 million pieces of mail processed daily with no detection safeguards, contamination spreading to 15 locations inside the facility. His reporting between October 26th and 31st revealed a disorganized FBI investigation that would not identify Bruce Ivins as a suspect until nearly a decade later. By 2003, ABC sent Tapper to Iraq as the U.S. invasion unfolded. Embedded with Marines in Fallujah, one of the most dangerous cities in the country, he slept on the ground beside soldiers and moved through streets reduced to rubble. Danger was constant: snipers, mortars, and improvised explosive devices hidden in cars or debris. Troops told him they feared IEDs above all else, knowing a single wrong step could end everything. Those encounters stripped away abstraction and gave his reporting a rawness that conveyed what combat actually felt like. 2 years later, in 2005, Tapper stood amid the flooded remains of New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. Entire neighborhoods were submerged, water rising to the second floors of homes. While officials framed the disaster as unavoidable, Tapper and his team uncovered a harsher truth. The levees had failed, despite repeated warnings. His reporting forced attention onto FEMA's broken response and the preventable nature of the catastrophe. ABC's coverage earned an Emmy, and the national conversation shifted from natural disaster to human accountability. Between 2006 and 2008, Tapper worked behind the scenes at ABC's This Week, shaping coverage on national security. He helped produce investigations into Guantanamo Bay, pressing officials to confront the reality that many detainees had never been charged with a crime. His scripts sharpened the program's tone, directly challenging the Bush administration's defenses of torture, detention, and secrecy. In 2007, Tapper returned to Afghanistan, this time embedded in a convoy that came under Taliban fire. He remained live on air as bullets struck near his vehicle. The moment left a lasting impact. Journalists, he realized, were no longer merely observers. They were targets. His subsequent reporting made clear that silencing cameras had become part of the conflict itself, and that truth-telling now carried its own battlefield risks. In 2008, his coverage of the Iraq troop surge earned the Merriman Smith Award, recognizing his ability to explain both the political calculations and the human cost behind rising casualty numbers. That same clarity propelled him forward. On November 5, 2008, one day after Barack Obama's election victory, ABC named Jake Tapper its senior White House correspondent. He approached the role without hesitation. Within weeks, he revealed more than 100 undisclosed meetings between lobbyists and transition officials. He uncovered 21 meetings involving defense lobbyists that occurred before ethics rules took effect on January 20, 2009, forcing the White House to acknowledge early failures. By March, his reporting had triggered 12 ethics complaints. From 2008 through 2010, Tapper won 3 consecutive Merriman Smith Awards. In 2009, he broke the story of Tom Dashley's $140,000 tax scandal, ending Dashley's nomination for health secretary just 11 days after it was announced. In 2010, he revealed that Director of National Intelligence Dennis Blair was pushed out following a failed Afghanistan review. And in 2011, he reported on August 5 that Standard & Poor's would downgrade the United States AAA credit rating amid $1.3 trillion in accumulated debt, another moment when his reporting placed the public inside decisions that reshaped the nation. The downgrade arrived the very next day, and the impact was immediate. Markets dropped by 6.7%, a jolt felt across the global economy. For Jake Tapper, it was not an endpoint, but another moment where reporting intersected directly with consequence. Just months earlier, on January 20, 2009, Tapper had led ABC News live coverage of Barack Obama's presidential inauguration. An estimated 1.8 million people filled the National Mall, while 38 million more watched across the country. Tapper coordinated a sprawling broadcast operation, over 100 camera feeds, aerial shots, and live crowd reactions from all 50 states. The precision and scale of the coverage earned an Emmy Award for Outstanding Live Coverage, reinforcing his reputation as someone who could manage complexity without losing narrative clarity. In June 2010, Tapper confronted another defining test. After the Deepwater Horizon explosion killed 11 workers and released nearly 5 million barrels of oil into the Gulf of Mexico, he interviewed BP chief executive Tony Hayward live on air. BP's public estimates of the spill size were already under scrutiny. Tapper pressed Hayward with data showing that the numbers were off by tens of thousands of barrels per day. Under sustained questioning, Hayward acknowledged the discrepancy. Within days, President Obama demanded accountability, and BP committed $20 billion to recovery efforts. The interview spread rapidly online, drawing roughly 5 million views in 48 hours. It became a clear demonstration that facts, when applied relentlessly, could still corner power. Later that year, ABC elevated Tapper to the anchor chair of This Week. In just 4 months, he secured exclusive interviews with CIA Director Leon Panetta, Vice President Joe Biden, Rahm Emanuel, and former Secretary of State Colin Powell. He revealed that the CIA's budget had climbed to $54 billion and that drone operations had expanded by 300% since 2008. Ratings rose by 18%, and viewers responded to a tone that conveyed urgency without spectacle. The next major chapter began in January 2013, when Tapper joined CNN as its chief Washington correspondent. He was no stranger to power by then. After the 2008 election, he had already served as ABC's senior White House correspondent, learning firsthand how pressure reshapes decision-making. CNN moved quickly to put him front and center. Just 2 months later, in March 2013, he launched a weekday program of his own, The Lead with Jake Tapper. From the outset, the show set itself apart. It slowed the news cycle just enough to examine rather than amplify. Political scandals were not rushed past the surface. They were unpacked. One of the earliest and most consequential stories was Benghazi. Tapper's team obtained exclusive State Department emails that revealed internal diplomatic tensions during the attack and confusion that followed. The work resonated. In its first year, the lead won 3 national headliner awards, including recognition for its coverage of the Boston Marathon bombing, and earned multiple Emmy nominations. With each report, Tapper's reputation solidified. He was seen as tough but fair, direct yet grounded, someone willing to ask uncomfortable questions without turning the exchange into performance. That momentum carried him forward. In June 2015, CNN entrusted him with its Sunday morning flagship, State of the Union. The move signaled a shift. Tapper was no longer just covering the national conversation, he was shaping it. Then came the 2016 election, a relentless political storm that tested every journalist involved. Tapper led a team whose coverage would earn the National Headliner Award for best coverage of a major news event. Much of the focus fell on Donald Trump's campaign and the debates that defined it. One exchange stood out. Tapper pressed Trump directly on his proposal to ban Muslims from entering the United States, challenging him on constitutional and legal limits rather than allowing the answer to drift. The moment reverberated across cable news. Viewers praised the rigor. Critics noted the restraint. CNN's ratings rose as audiences sought coverage that felt firm without tipping into chaos. By April 2021, Tapper's role expanded again. CNN named him lead anchor for major Washington events, placing him at the center of the network's most consequential moments. That responsibility crystallized on April 28, 2021, when he moderated President Joe Biden's first joint address to Congress. The setting was historic, the stakes unmistakable. Tapper questioned Biden about the timeline for withdrawing from Afghanistan, citing declassified intelligence that revealed how disordered the planning had been behind the scenes. His approach balanced acknowledgement of accomplishments with pointed scrutiny of internal failures. Analysts later cited the moment as an example of how to confront power without flinching. That instinct had surfaced years earlier. On February 7, 2017, Tapper conducted a 25-minute interview with White House advisor Kellyanne Conway that would quickly go viral. During the exchange, Conway referenced the so-called Bowling Green massacre, an event that never occurred, while defending the Trump administration's travel ban. Tapper stopped her immediately. He corrected the record in real time and pressed again. Eventually, Conway expressed regret and apologized for what she called an inartful remark. The segment spread nationwide. President Trump responded by labeling CNN fake news. Weeks later, Conway returned to CNN to apologize again, describing the moment as one of the most humbling experiences of her career. For Tapper, it was another instance of holding a clear line, even when backlash was inevitable. That line carried him into one of the most watched television events of the decade. In June 2024, he co-moderated the presidential debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. 51 million viewers tuned in, making it the most watched debate in years. The rules were strict. Microphones were muted. Time limits were enforced. Tapper ensured those boundaries held. His questions centered on inflation, immigration, and presidential fitness. When Biden struggled with several responses, concerns spread quickly among Democrats about his age and endurance. The debate was analyzed and reanalyzed for weeks, becoming a defining moment of the election cycle. Reaction to the debate was immediate and divided. Some critics pointed to the absence of real-time fact-checking, arguing that moments went unchallenged as they happened. Others focused on something different, the control and composure Tapper maintained in a room thick with political tension. That same tension followed him into the next year. In February 2025, Tapper and journalist Alex Thompson released a book titled Original Sin. Based on more than 200 interviews with insiders, the book made a sweeping and controversial claim that the Biden White House had deliberately obscured the extent of the president's cognitive decline. The reporting detailed tightly scripted public appearances, carefully managed movements, and a sharp reduction in unscripted moments. It described internal acknowledgments that President Biden appeared weaker in person than on television, a contrast that became impossible to ignore after the collapse of his performance during the 2024 debate. Tapper and Thompson argue that nearly all, by their estimate 99%, Other reporting that informed the book emerged after the election. That point was central to their defense. They challenged accusations that the media had knowingly looked away, instead documenting how insiders themselves admitted to gradual self-deception. According to their sources, family members and senior staff worked to shield the president from scrutiny until withdrawal from the race became unavoidable in June 2024. The response was swift and intense. Conservatives claimed vindication. Democrats accused Tapper of betrayal. Online forums erupted, and scheduled book events were abruptly canceled. On May 20th, 2025, during a live Los Angeles Times discussion streamed from his Washington home, Tapper addressed the backlash directly. His explanation was blunt. He and his co-author had been misled. The controversy surrounding Original Sin quickly outgrew the book itself, igniting a broader national debate about transparency, presidential health, and the limits of what the public is permitted to know about those in power. Through the turbulence, Tapper's personal life remained intentionally private. He met his future wife, Jennifer Marie Brown, in January 2004 during the Iowa caucuses at a hotel bar in Des Moines. She was working for Planned Parenthood. He was covering the campaign. They married on September 3, 2006, in a small ceremony near her hometown in Missouri, attended by roughly 100 guests and officiated by Tapper's sister-in-law, Rabbi Lori Hahn Tapper. Together, they raised 2 children in Washington, D.C. Alice, born in 2008, and Jack, born in 2010. Their household mirrored the balance that defined Tapper's professional life, seriousness paired with warmth. Family game nights often drifted into policy debates. At age 11, Alice co-authored a children's book with her father, and later wrote a New York Times op-ed urging girls to find their voices. Jack largely remained out of the public eye. The family emphasized discussion, curiosity, and service over spectacle. Even their home became part of the narrative. Purchased in 2007 for $1.2 million, their Forest Hills residence is now valued at roughly $3.2 million. The 4-bedroom house with 3.5 bathrooms, a pink front door, and a deck overlooking Rock Creek Park includes a home studio added for remote broadcasting. It represented stability, an anchor after years spent inside nonstop news cycles. Yet earlier moments never fully released their grip. In December 1997, weeks before the Clinton-Lewinsky scandal erupted, Tapper shared a platonic dinner with Monica Lewinsky at a Tex-Mex restaurant in Adams Morgan. He wrote about it at the time and revisited the encounter on air in 2021, underscoring how ordinary evenings can become inseparable from history once events collide. By August 2025, when a hot microphone caught him snapping, "Give me my show," during coverage of the Trump-Putin summit, the reaction felt almost predictable. The pressure had always been there. CNN stood by him. Social media laughed, then moved on. The moment faded. What remained was the through line of his career, a journalist defined by connection and confrontation, by a refusal to let power operate without challenge, and by an enduring belief that silence, especially in moments that matter, is never neutral.